Opening minds. Opening minds. Opening minds. Opening minds. Opening minds.
Hello, you're on Community Radio 2XX 98.3 FM, and this is Opening Minds, the show that talks about mental illness to reduce stigma and discrimination. Our focus is on bringing personal stories about people's experiences with mental illness to the air and discussing programs and initiatives, both local and national, that contribute to recovery and well-being. Opening Minds is funded through Mental Illness Education ACT, known locally as MIEACT, and the opinions expressed through Opening Minds show are not necessarily always those of MIEACT. My name is Doris from CarersACT, and tonight I'm talking with Robin Alderson-Smith and Kristin Holzapfel about carer burnout and how to manage it. First of all, I'd like to begin by introducing our two guest speakers tonight. Kristin is the author of the book Selfless, a social worker's story of losing and finding herself, and this book will be published next year, 2014. And Robin is a counsellor with CarersACT. She's got an extensive counselling background working with homeless youth, women and children experiencing domestic violence, survivors of sexual assault, and also survivors of torture and trauma who are mostly refugees. So welcome, Kristin and Robin.
Thank you, Doris. Thanks, Doris.
Great to have you on the show. So our topic today, carer burnout. Tell me, why is this topic relevant for carers?
Oh, it's very relevant to carers, Doris. Carers are really very vulnerable to the effects of burnout. A lot of the time the caring role begins with quite a traumatic period, and that sort of trauma can continue, and that also has a very significant effect on whether burnout occurs or doesn't occur. Burnout can occur slowly, or it can be something which happens really quite quickly, and it's something which is really, really common amongst paid carers and non-paid carers alike. The caring role is associated with an awful lot of direct stresses, and all of that has impact on burnout. Carers have a lack of time, just purely a lack of time. That's a lack of time to work and earn money, a lack of time to rest, to socialise, to maintain basic health. That might be things like they don't have the time to go to the dentist, go to the GP, maintain uninterrupted eating and sleeping routines. Quite often the caring role involves physical strains, and that can also exacerbate physical injuries and physical issues which are exacerbated by stress and burnout. And there's also an awful lot of indirect stresses as well. There's also a lot of stresses that carers have to face about lots of ongoing appointments, bills coming in, getting the runaround with different appointments, being told different things by different people, not being able to afford the treatment that they would really like. And also, you know, the role is very personally taxing, and it means that they have to put off an awful lot of their own hopes and expectations for what they really would have liked for their relationship, and instead they have a caring role which they like and want to do, but quite often that's a role which is thrust upon them.
And Robin?
Well, in my experience as a counsellor, what I actually see is I don't actually see that immediate stress that Kristin talks about. What I often see is, people are not even aware of the fact that they're carers because they're caring for family members. So if they're a mother, they're just saying, well, I'm a mother, or if they're a child, I'm just the daughter or the son of, and so forth. And in many cases, people have been doing it for a number of years before suddenly there's a trigger that says, hang on a minute, I'm a carer, and it might be talking to somebody at work, or it might be something they've heard on the media. And so by the time they come to see a counsellor, they're actually in not so good a way, because it's been years sometimes, and that accumulated stress is leading to the burnout that Kristin was talking about.
So both of you are saying that carers may not even be aware that they have burnout.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. I have this horrible analogy that I talk about with carers. which is the frog in the water. I don't know if you know that one, where the frog sits in the water and doesn't realise that the water's being heated up, and then finally, when they do realise, it's too late for the frog to jump out. And that's a bit where the point where carers finally arrive at the counselling services.
So, Kristin, what have you discovered are some of the signs of burnout that carers may identify with?
Thanks, Doris. I think a lot of people are really quite surprised about how quickly burnout can happen. I think it's quite an ingrained myth that burnout is something that happens over a long period of time. It can very well happen over a long period of time, but can also happen surprisingly quickly. Some of the symptoms of burnout are very similar to the symptoms of depression and anxiety. You often feel really just spent, that there's absolutely nothing left to give. And the difference between stress, which we all feel, and the difference between stress and burnout are quite marked. The symptoms of stress is a loss of energy, and the symptoms of burnout is a loss of motivation and hope and ideals for the future. The symptoms of stress are really hyperactive emotions, very heightened emotions, and the symptoms of burnout are very blunted emotions. That's what I was saying about that. There's simply nothing left to give.
I'd like to expand on that a little bit, and I have a list in front of me here which I'd like to read out. And the first point is I just don't feel like talking to or seeing anyone today, even my friends and family. So it's that social withdrawal, and I think what Kristin said about having no energy is an indicator of that. Another point is I used to really enjoy reading mystery novels, but for some reason even a thrilling whodunit doesn't seem to hold my interest anymore. So there's that lack of, there's no energy to even do the things that at one time brought you pleasure. And I think that is a very clear sign for many carers too, who will suddenly say, I say to them, so how do you cope? And they'll say, oh, well, I used to like bushwalking, but now I come to think of it, I'm actually not bushwalking anymore. Or I used to belong to a book club, and oh dear, yes, that's fallen down as well. So loss of appetite, although sometimes it can be the actual opposite. You can find yourself eating a lot more as a way of coping with the powerful feelings that have been building up, or not eating enough. Sleep might be affected, so not as I said, there's no balance, so you might be sleeping a lot more than you normally would, or having a very interrupted and therefore not very restful sleep, and becoming physically unwell. So whereas at one stage your immune system was able to resist colds and flus, suddenly you're not able to do that anymore.
In a way, it's hard to differentiate between burnout and possibly being depressed. It really.
And this is true.
Yeah. And you've kind of done that in earlier, Kristin, when you were talking about the difference between, for example, stress and burnout. How does a person decide whether they could be just burnt out or they're depressed?
Well, I would suggest coming to see a counsellor would probably help you work out the difference between the two, because doing it on a general at a general level is not very helpful.
Yeah.
So we would individuate that.
So some professional assistance.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, I think it's time to just go for a very quick break while we gather our thoughts. Our music today is a song called The Peace Bringer by Philip Chapman on an album called The Return of the Angels. Hello, you're listening to Opening Minds on 2XX 98.3 FM. My name is Doris from CarersACT, and I'm talking with Robin Alderson-Smith, counsellor at CarersACT, and also with Kristin Holzapfel, author of the book which is being published next year called Selfless, a social worker's story of losing and finding herself. Thank you both. Now, we've been talking a little bit about carer burnout and why it's important for carers and how to identify it. I think let's move across now to some self-management strategies, like how can carers look after themselves, particularly if they're feeling that they're becoming burnt out. Kristin, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Doris. There's lots of things that people can do. I think that it's really important that as much as carers might feel really quite helpless when they're in burnout and that there isn't anything that they can do, that there are things that they can do. The very first thing that is very important for people to do is to reduce isolation. It's very common for people who are feeling burnt out to just want to remove themselves from the world, feeling like, I don't know anybody else who feels this way, maybe it's just me. There's lots of shame. Carers may not ask for help because they don't want those who are caring for to know they aren't managing. That's also very common, and another reason why people want to secret themselves away. The message that we want to get out there is you're not alone. You're not alone, and asking for help is a really good sign. If there's any fear or embarrassment that carers feel about the person that they're caring for, that they will misbehave out in public or maybe cause a scene in public, we really want to get the message across that everybody's different. Carers have needs. The people they're caring for, they have needs. All carers are valued and their role is valued. That's the message we really want to get across. The other thing that's important that carers do to limit that feeling of burnout is to have a sense of control, feel like there is something that they can actually manage about this situation. Carers often don't receive acknowledgement or thanks for their role because it's sort of seen as their duty to care for their relative, and often they might feel that the decisions are out of their hands regarding treatment options, funding. These are things that everybody else decides. They want to have decisions that they can decide for themselves also, and to set boundaries for themselves about what they can do, what they can't do, what other people's role is and what their role is, and to make sure that they forgive themselves for what can and can't be done, and practice lots and lots of very important self-care, self-compassion, and care for their physical self.
That sounds like some really great ideas and strategies, Kristin. Boundary setting, Robin, and
well, look, before we talk about that, I'd really like to talk about something that Kristin just brought up, and that's reducing isolation. And at CarersACT, my funding is mental health focused. So the people that I see are mostly caring for family members with mental health issues. So when we run groups for these particular carers, and we also run a 5-week a group called Keeping Families Connected, and this addresses issues of isolation, and also the support groups that are run on the north side, the south side, and I think there's one starting up in Gungahlin. I'm not sure about that. But these groups are also there to help carers reduce isolation in their lives. Boundaries is a huge issue that comes up in these groups, because especially when you're dealing with family members with mental health issues, because the normal boundaries that you would set up when that person is unwell, it becomes very difficult to maintain them. So what we talk about in the groups and also in the one-on-one counselling is the importance of setting up the boundaries when the person is well enough to hear it, so that you're not trying to do it at a time that's not appropriate. The person's not in any way able to listen to what you're saying. And trying to we talk about them as a bit elastic, the boundaries, because it's sometimes very difficult, as I say, to maintain them. But as much as possible having them in place and not fearing to have them in place. So if you are experiencing violence in the home, for instance, it's very important to name it as violence and to use the very same services that anybody else would use to maintain your safety.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty important issues, aren't they, around boundary setting? But
Well,
very difficult, I think, for a lot of people when you love and care for someone to... And you're also worried about that person to start thinking about your own personal boundaries.
Well, that's right. But I mean, as we always say with carers, that if you're driving the ship and suddenly you're not there anymore, the ship's likely to go off in all sorts of directions. So as hard as it is, it's very important for the carers to maintain that control.
Yeah. So what about some of the other strategies that you talk about when you meet with carers, and, for example, at the Keeping Families Connected program?
Yes, well, carers themselves come up with a lot of strategies, so it's not... I don't see myself in any way as an expert. I just give them the information that I get on a daily basis in my work, and also the information, the strategies that I would get from carers in other groups, and they themselves provide their own personal strategies. Yeah.
So are there any strategies that you found that have been really helpful for carers that they've also identified?
I think a really important one, as we mentioned earlier on, is to just contact somebody. Don't stay on your own and isolated, because that's the worst thing that you can do. So please, if you're out there and listening, contact CarersACT. We are there for you. This is our business, and the counselling service is open 5 days a week. We have offices in Woden, Holt, and now in Gungahlin, and we don't have waiting lists. So if you don't feel that counselling is a good idea, just come in and have a cuppa with us and just test it out for yourself.
And of course, another really important service for that carers would find really helpful is accessing mental health respite. And so taking time out for a break.
Yes, exactly. The respite teams that we have at CarersACT are in fact just that. They're respite for the carers, not for the person that they're caring for.
So if carers would like to find out more information about the services provided by CarersACT, they can call us on 6296 9900. So that's 6296 9900. And the website is www.carersACT, all one word, .org.au. I think it's almost time for us to wrap up this show. Any other comments that or observations, suggestions that you'd like to make before we finish up?
I'd probably just like to say that the consequences of burnout are there because people care. We know that you're caring, and we know that you're doing the very best that you can with what you've got, and our role here at CarersACT is to support you in that. You're not alone, and we do want to be here to listen to you.
Hear, hear.
All right. Well, thank you, Kristin and Robin, for coming along today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Doris. And thank you to XX. This is just such an important issue, and I hope that there are people out there that are going to finally make contact and not be isolated.
Well, that's the end of our program. You've been listening to Opening Minds, the show that talks about mental illness. For further information on the content in Opening Minds, feel free to contact us via the MIEACT website at www.miact.org.au, where you can also find out more about MIEACT and listen to our past programs. If after listening to this show you feel like you need to talk to someone, Lifeline offers free 24-hour confidential telephone support, and they can be reached on 13 11 14. That number again, 13 11 14. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we'll go out with our theme song by Niles Barkley, Crazy.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space.